Salutare, îmi place foarte mult să mă uit la Brian de la The New Atlas și mă bucur că a revenit cu un videoclip nou, da? Stilul lui este foarte pedant, foarte rece, foarte tăios, foarte precis, explică și explică din nou și repetă și corelează și face și pe ultimul prost să înțeleagă care este realitatea, da? Care este atât de diferită de poezia eroică pe care o auzim cel mai adesea în mainstream media. Dar hai că vorbesc eu prea mult, să las pe el să vorbească, dar și să intervin totuși mai puțin pentru a nu vă răpi din timp.
I want to talk about the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. I start where I usually do, the map. This is liveuamap.com. It's a pro-Ukrainian live map, so please keep that in mind when we look at it.
Cu materialul clientului, da? O hartă pro-ucraineană.
But now, about a month and a half into Ukraine's long-awaited offensive, we can see that the line of contact is relatively unchanged. They are still struggling to break through the security zone and reach Russia's first of many layered defenses, and that goes for the Zaporozhye region and also in the Donbas region. And I have talked about this many times before. The city of Bakhmut, the operation to take Bakhmut was always a grinding operation meant to exhaust and deplete Ukrainian manpower and equipment, and it most certainly did achieve that. Russian forces do not necessarily have to hold Bakhmut because most of their defenses are located, these layered defenses, similar to what they built in the south, are located between Bakhmut and Popasnia.
Deci ați înțeles ce ne explică el. În principiu, rușii nu țin de teren nici măcar de Bakhmut, da? Ei vor doar să-și macine adversarul pentru a înfăptui acea demilitarizare a Ucrainei. Nu interesează cum se numește parcela în care această demilitarizare se întâmplă. Poate să fie Bakhmut sau poate să fie un câmp oarecare.
So even if they were to lose Bakhmut, if Ukraine were to take it or bypass it and force Russian troops to withdraw, they would still have to breach layers and layers of defenses to reach Popasnia and the rest of the Donbas region. While attempting to breach this security zone and reach and then overcome Russian defense lines, Ukraine has been suffering massive losses in both manpower and equipment. Russia has...
Manpower nu e forță de muncă, ci forță de luptă, da? Și echipament.
Talked about, which is now probably well over 250 tanks, hundreds of armored and unarmored vehicles, and tens of thousands of casualties on the Ukrainian side. Just this week...
Zeci de mii. Mult, foarte mult, foarte mult.
In the last week alone, I have seen large numbers of videos of M777 artillery pieces being destroyed, mostly by drones. The Russian Ministry of Defense has been making these claims. These videos have showed up on Telegram, and there are resources on Telegram providing statistics for the number of M777s destroyed. And one number, and this is impossible to confirm, they say about 15 just this month alone. Over the last 2 or 3 months, I would say about 30 M777s have been destroyed. And wouldn't you know that in this most recent US Department of Defense assistance package to Ukraine, as a matter of fact, this one right here, dated July 7th, 2023, it includes 31 additional M155mm howitzers. And actually, I'm going to go over this entirely.
Adică le înlocuiește o parte din artileria distrusă.
And again, the links to all
Am văzut 32 de Bradley-uri, cam tot așa, cam câte au pierdut le dă Biden. Bă, mă rog, că nu le dă Biden de la el din buzunar. Le dă contribuabilul american. Fiecare fie că n-are chef.
These articles and resources that I cite in my video will be in the video description below, so you can take a look at it yourself. Now, first on the list is additional munitions for Patriot air defense systems. And I want to remind everyone that the Western media itself, before the US and its allies sent Patriot missile systems to Ukraine, admitted that there was a global shortage of interceptors, the missiles launched by the Patriot missile system. And this was because Saudi Arabia was using large quantities of them to intercept.
Oricum, vă dați seama, în condițiile în care nu prea există muniție pentru aceste sisteme Patriot, cum era sistemul la Patriot de acum o lună și ceva, de la Kiev, de trăgea rachete ca la nuntă, fără număr.
Except incoming drones.
Deci nici nu mai discutăm dacă acel kinjal rusesc a distrus sau nu, total sau parțial, sistemul de apărare antiaeriană Patriot. E un dezastru în sine faptul că a lansat atât de multe rachete. Zeci de rachete.
Missiles from Yemen.
Minute în șir.
The problem became so acute and the US was so unable to manufacture and send more interceptors.
So unable. Atât de incapabil au fost Statele Unite ale Americii să producă aceste rachete.
There's to Saudi Arabia that Saudi Arabia ended up asking other Arab nations in the region to transfer what they had on hand to Saudi Arabia. So just keep that in mind. That is a very limited resource. The launchers and the interceptors, we have heard accounts from, again, the Russian Ministry of Defense that they have destroyed several launchers, and the interceptors themselves are on short supply, even according to the West. AIM-7 missiles for air defense, and they're not very clear what these will be used with. Is this one of several missiles that NASAM's surface-to-air missile system can use, or is this going to be used by what remains of Ukraine's Air Force?
What remains? Ce a mai rămas din aviația militară ucraineană? Uneori sunt și uimit. Bă, ăștia chiar mai au? Probabil că au câteva ascunse pe undeva ca să zică că mai au, da? De exemplu, nu mai au marină militară. Aveau nu știu ce bărcuță de desant, dacă am înțeles bine, ok? Și pe asta au hăisit-o rușii acum cu vreo lună în urmă, cam așa, da? Și gata, au terminat cu marina militară ucraineană. Uite că avionașe Cicară mai avea de luptă, zic.
To try and intercept incoming targets. They don't specify. Stinger anti-aircraft systems. This is another system that the US sent to Ukraine in large quantities since February 2022. And their supply of these missiles are now depleted. This is a man-portable air defense system, and they are in short supply, and it will take years to ramp up production and just replace what they've sent Ukraine.
Povestea acestui război, care rămâne primul fără muniție, pierde. Și întrebarea nu se pune dacă rămâne Ucraina sau Rusia, nu între astea două entități se duce discuția, ci dacă rămâne vestul colectiv sau Rusia fără muniție. Și din ce se pare, vestul colectiv este primul care se va trezi cu depozitele goale.
Additional ammunition for high mobility artillery rocket systems, HIMARS. So the US sent a number of these launchers together with M270s, a tracked version with 2 rocket pods instead of HIMARS's 1 rocket pod. They all launch the same type of guided rocket. The US sends these rockets in small numbers to Ukraine, and I speculate the reason they're doing this is to force Ukraine to ration them, because at the slow rate that they are being sent to Ukraine, the US can sustain the supply of these guided rockets. If the rate of fire increased beyond...
Da, s-au gândit americanii, bă, dacă le trimitem multe, ăștia sunt mână spartă și imediat, pac, unele peste ruși, altele peste, civilii din Donetsk și tot așa. Nu? Hai să le trimitem mai puține ca să și le ca să n-aibă practic cum să facă risipă. Când n-ai de unde să faci risipă.
On this, they would not be able to. So this is something that they are doing to limit Ukraine's ability to use this system on the battlefield, again, because of the short supply of munitions to go along with these systems. And then we get to 31 155 millimeter howitzers. They're sending these howitzers to Ukraine in the middle of an ongoing offensive because, as you can see, they are being destroyed left and right on the battlefield.
Left and right.
Probably that number of 15 this month and another 15 between the last 2 months, 30, over 30, that's very possible. Now they're forced to replace these lost howitzers. These are not 31 additional howitzers that they're going to add to their arsenal. No, these are to replace their losses. In addition to that, 155 millimeter artillery rounds, including DPICM and 105 millimeter artillery rounds. Now that's DPICM means dual purpose improved conventional munition, but it's just a cluster munition. It is an artillery shell.
Muniție cu dispersie, ok?
That releases smaller submunitions that then explode. And a certain number of them will not explode because they're defective, and that is just when they come off the production line, and then the longer they're in storage, the more and more of them that will be defective.
Da, cu alte cuvinte, acestea care nu vor exploda în momentul lansării, vor fi o posibilă sursă de accidente în rândul civililor ani după ani și ani după terminarea conflictului, da?
And they're not sending this to Ukraine because they need this capability. They're sending this to Ukraine because this is the only artillery shell they still have sitting around that fits into the M777 that you...
Deci ați înțeles, au rămas fără obuze, să le spunem, convenționale și spun, domne, pe sistemul, dacă n-ai pâine, mănânci cozonac. Le trimit chestii de-astea foarte, foarte periculoase și nu foarte agreate în lumea. Stați, că nu o lasă treacă așa de ușor. Cei care urmăriți de mai mult timp canalul meu, știți că am avut un fel de debate de la distanță cu numitul Tudor Dax. În principiu, ca să rezumăm, el susținea că armata ucraineană nu folosește acest tip de muniție, că visez eu, că mi se pare că am văzut așa ceva folosit în Donetsk, că degeaba spune Patrick Lancaster și filmează atacurile astea sălbatice îndreptate împotriva civililor, că mi se pare că stai puțin, că trebuia să fie geamurile sparte, că o fi copății, știți? Și eu spuneam, bă, stai că ei cam folosesc. Ținând cont și de faptul că oricum Ucraina, ca și SUA de altfel și, bă, nu mai știu, dar cred că și Rusia oricum nu sunt semnatare ale tratatului care interzice folosirea acestui tip de muniții. Tudore, se pare că timpul mi-a dat dreptate, da? Observăm că hegemonul sau licuriciu, cum îl alintăm noi, se oferă să aprovizioneze armata ucraineană cu muniție cu dispersie și noi n-am auzit niciun oficial ucrainean care să spună nu, noi să folosim așa ceva, nu o facem noi de astea. Ci hai, dați. Unii dintre voi o să spună că nu, domne, că armata ucraineană va folosi acest tip de muniție strict împotriva armatei ruse, care oricum tot nu este ok, să ne înțelegem, dar tocmai asta e problema la tipul ăsta de muniție, da? Cu dispersie, că se dispersează, hei, ce să vezi, pe o suprafață foarte mare și deseori când vrei să ataci militarii, vrând nevrând afectezi și ataci și civilii care pot fi prin zonă. Ok? Hai să continuăm. Tudore.
Ukraine can fire downrange because they are out of conventional artillery shells that Ukraine needs to continue fighting. Now, I've heard in several news stories that this is a stopgap measure and they're only going to send these cluster munitions until they can ramp up production of conventional artillery.
Ceea ce este foarte greu să ramp up production de muniție convențională, că nu e chiar așa, din gură e greu să o faci, dar în practică necesită timp, ani, da?
Okay. But as I've explained, that is not going to happen until at least 2025, and that's if everything goes right. And even in 2025, both the US and Europe combined will only then be able to provide Ukraine with the 6,000 rounds per day that Ukraine normally fires.
Deci asta îmi place foarte mult la Brian. Cum o ia, frate, cu lista în față? Vă citește acolo, ia la rând ce se trimite, ce se consumă, cum se consumă, cât durează. Asta îmi place la el și chestia asta nu o văd pe niciun alt canal sau la niciun alt analist.
This is their normal rate of fire, and they're most certainly firing more now that they're on the offensive. And we remember that Washington Post interview with the Ukrainian Commander General Valery Zaluzhny saying that at times they are outgunned 10-1. So just keep all of that in mind. This is not a stopgap measure. This is desperation.
Nu sunt depășiți numeric 10-1, ci sunt depășiți din punct de vedere al înarmării de ruși în proporție de 10-1. Adică au ucrainenii un tun, rușii au 10. Sau, să o luăm altfel, au ucrainenii un obuz de artilerie, rușii au 10. Și evident le și trimit spre pozițiile ucrainene. Despre asta este vorba, da?
Because they are out of ammunition, and they are not going to get more ammunition anytime in the near or even intermediate future. 32 Bradley infantry fighting vehicles, 32
fix le înlocuiesc ce or fi pierdut, da?
Stryker armored personnel carriers. Now, obviously, this is the United States attempting to replace Ukraine's losses. They're not sending this in addition to what Ukraine already has. They sent a certain number of vehicles to be incorporated into a certain number of brigades. A brigade is usually around 4,000 Ukrainian troops. Dozens or scores of vehicles. They are taking...
Or fi 4.000, dar la ucraineni se practică moda asta, da? Brigăzile și în general restul unităților de luptă care sunt doar cu numele. Cu numărul sunt mai împuținate, da? Ok.
In heavy losses. We see the pictures, we see the videos coming in every day of burnt out Bradleys and other armored vehicles. Ka-52 Russian attack helicopters taking out armored vehicles with the anti-tank guided missiles that they carry at very long range.
Este happy time for alligators, da?
Just to the point where you can't even really see what type of armored vehicle it actually is. They're losing huge numbers of these, and the United States is trying to replace them in the middle of an ongoing offensive. Mine clearing equipment.
Aoleu. Să ne înțelegem. Aoleu. Au pierdut și acolo regește ucrainenii, da?
Again, Ukraine is in the middle of an ongoing offensive. They are in the middle of attempting to breach minefields, and they are losing their mine clearing equipment. We've seen it burning in heaps in the middle of these minefields, and the US and their allies are trying to send them more.
Ard în grămezi.
Almost as if they didn't realize they would need more before they launched this offensive.
Tocmai. Băi, nu au realizat chestia asta. Deci gândiți-vă totuși ce mari strategi sunt ăștia de la NATO. Da? Efectiv, eu încă sunt șocat. Nu pot să-mi revin de la chestia asta că prima oară au trimis cu coloanele de blindate. Că am înțeles că acum practică ofensiva pe furiș, adică câțiva băieți din tufă în tufă se duc spre ruși. Oricum nu rezolvă nici așa nimic. Bă, dar inițial au trimis cu coloane de blindate și și-au dat seama, rușii au elicoptere de luptă. Vai, și-au dat seama, rușii au minat terenurile. Vai, nu ne așteptam la asta. Și-au dat seama, și tancurile și blindatele noastre ard când sunt lovite de lopețile rușilor. Incredibil, ce surpriză!
The problem with all of this, sending additional Bradleys, Strykers, mine clearing equipment, is that it's being destroyed in huge numbers because they are sending Ukraine on an offensive without the appropriate equipment, without the appropriate skill sets, without the appropriate
Da, deci
type
fără
of
antrenament.
combat capabilities. No air power, insufficient artillery support. It doesn't matter how many armored vehicles or how much mine clearing equipment you give to Ukraine, it's going to be destroyed in the middle of these minefields.
Și nu numai, trebuie să ținem cont și de echipamentele care sunt distruse înainte de a apărea pe câmpul de luptă, în depozite, da, și ce mai vedem noi arzând când vine breaking news la televizor și aflăm că în Liov a fost distrusă, nu știu, o pizzerie sau ceva, zic la întâmplare, da? Sau un depozit sau whatever. Ați înțeles.
To clear a minefield, as I've explained before, you need to first clear the opposite end of the minefield of any long-range weapons that could threaten your engineering teams as they're trying to make these breaches. Otherwise, you're going to be under fire, already carrying out a complex and dangerous operation, and you are going to lose your equipment in that minefield. And then,
to add insult to the injury, ceva de genul ăsta, ok? După ce că oricum e foarte nasol că tu ești, da, genist la deminat, să mai vină și ăia cu artileria peste tine în timp ce faci această operațiune delicată. Nu s-au gândit strategii americani, nu s-au gândit, nu? Ok.
Once you fail,
spun americani pentru că chiar mă îndoiesc că Ucraina e lăsată așa de capul ei să se planifice ea cum vrea, în timp ce ea dau echipamente fără număr. Evident că îi consiliază, evident că se consideră cei mai războinici ai planetei, fără să ia în calcul faptul că până acum au dus numai războaie cu națiuni mici, în sensul de slabe, din punct de vedere militar, dar cu niște băieți care, nu știu, Hyundai cu mitraliere montate sau ce Toyota erau camionetele alea, nu? Ok. Și acum, hopa, ruși, băi, cu totul și cu totul altă mâncare de pește.
To breach the minefield, Russia, with its remote mine-laying capabilities, are just going to put more mines there for you to start all over again. Tube launched optically tracked wired guided missiles. This is the TOW anti-tank missile system. It's older than the Javelin. It came before the Javelin. It's cumbersome for
Sulița este Javelina aia, da?
infantry teams that have to carry them around. You'll often see them mounted on Humvees. And all of these Bradleys the US send are supposedly equipped with TOW missile launchers. Also on the list is Javelin and other anti-armored systems.
Mai au Javeline?
Rockets. Again, the Javelin anti-tank missile system was something that was sent in large numbers initially at the beginning of the special military.
Și tot n-a făcut nicio diferență, cum de altfel nicio altă armă trimisă în Ucraina nu va face nici o diferență, ci doar va prelungi suferința combatanților.
Operation from February 2022 onward, and they're out of them. They have small numbers of them made available that they can send. Notice how all of these items, there are no
care să le poată trimite, nu notifica
quantities attached to them, because I think it would impact morale if people knew just how little Ukraine was receiving.
Da, înțelegeți ce spune Brian? Spune ceva de genul, bă, ăștia nu specifică numărul de javeline pe care le vor trimite Ucrainei pentru că s-ar face de râs. Ceva de genul. Păi, javeline. Și acum fiecare, da, tu ne gândim, bă, le-am mai trimis încă 100, încă 1000 și când acolo or fi 15 sau ceva de genul. Și atunci, bă, nu mai trece. Pune acolo la și altele, trimitem javeline, le trimitem alea, de care de fapt nu prea mai avem. De ce? Pentru că tot ucrainienii le-au consumat. Pe ruși, într-adevăr, bă, dar le-au consumat.
In the middle of this offensive that they're trying to launch. Precision aerial munitions.
Yeah, sure, my friend.
And this is, again, to be used with whatever is left of Ukraine's air force, which cannot be much. We remember, again, General Zaluzhny complaining to the Washington Post that he has no air cover. So they do have work.
Deci Zaluzhny, generalul Zaluzhny, despre care eu personal mă mir că încă mai respiră, sau mă rog, că este în deplinătatea facultăților fizice, spunea că, bă, n-avem aviație, n-avem acoperire aeriană, n-avem de nimic. Deci
they are using them to provide air cover, but it's simply not on the scale necessary for it to make any impact at all on the battlefield. And even The Ukrainian commander, General Zaluzhny, is admitting this. Also listed is the Penguin unmanned aerial system. This is a very small drone, very similar to the Russian Orlan. It is used for observation. It's also used to direct artillery fire.
Ok, deci le trimite și echipamente pentru a filma de sus, pentru a avea ce să vedem și noi pe TikTok sau ceva de genul. Bun.
I have some articles in the video description below describing them. This is from the Defense Post. Edge autonomy to supply Penguin drones to U.S. Army. There you can see it. It's quite small. Actually, apparently they make several different types of drones. Which one exactly Ukraine is getting, it's hard to tell. But even though this is an essential capability for Ukraine, they need these up in the air to look for targets and to direct Ukrainian artillery. The problem is they don't have a lot of these drones, they don't have a lot of the operators, and they don't have a lot of artillery to work with. And the artillery doesn't have a lot of ammunition.
Vedeți? Te apucă depresia dacă ești pro-Slava și l-asculți pe Brian. Da-aia n-au, oricum dacă ar avea n-au, oricum nimic.
To work with. And so, while this is an essential capability that the U.S. needs to continuously give Ukraine, they're unable to give this capability to Ukraine in quantities and in capability.
N-are, tată. De unde să-ți dea dacă n-are? Înțelege, copile, Zelenski. N-are, tataie de fapt, da? Biden e tataie de mult. Ok. E tataie chiar.
Necessary to make any difference on the battlefield, only to just draw things out longer and longer and longer. And you have to remember that in addition to the problems in terms of quantity and quality, is also the problem Ukraine has always faced, and that is Russian electronic warfare.
Okay.
Russia has extensive electronic warfare capabilities, and this is what makes it so difficult for Ukraine to operate its drones to the extent that Russia operates its drones versus Ukraine. Also on the list, 27 tactical vehicles to recover equipment.
Hey.
Equipment sitting in the middle of a minefield, possibly. 10 tactical vehicles to tow and haul equipment. 27 tactical vehicles to recover equipment, 10 tactical vehicles to tow and haul equipment, 37 vehicles in a conflict of this scale. Just think about how inadequate this all is.
Și oricum e complicat că le trimiți, da, să evacueze. Să spunem un Leopard 2 doar avariat și trimiți să-l tracteze sau ce-i faci. Și tot trimiți acel echipament sub focul artileriei inamice și riști să pierzi și deseori așa se și întâmplă și echipamentul ăsta, da?
And the scale that Ukraine is fighting on and the small quantities that the US and their allies are trickling into Ukraine. Demolitions, munitions, and systems for obstacle clearing. Seems like something that Ukraine could have used at the beginning of the offensive, not as they're in the middle of it. Small arms and over 28 million rounds of small arms, ammunition, and grenades. And see, now we see a quantity mentioned because it's a nice big number, and they hope that most people reading this or hearing about this will say, wow, 28 million rounds, that's a huge amount of ammunition. But in terms of small arms ammunition, that isn't much. For the, say, 9 brigades that NATO helped stand up, trained, and equipped for this offensive, 28 million rounds will last a couple of days, maybe a week, if even. Spare parts.
Mai de capul, Brian, ce le faci? Îi înlăcrimezi.
And other field equipment. And so that's where we are. A month and a half into the Ukrainian offensive, they're still stuck in the security zone. They've depleted their artillery ammunition. Now they need to use cluster munitions because that's the only thing that...
Da, deci muniți cu dispersie, nu de grup.
That fits in the guns that they have left, that they can fire, not the high explosive conventional rounds that they have been using and that they need. And they're also losing the guns used to fire this ammunition. So they are running out of absolutely everything. The armored vehicles are being lost. The engineering equipment is being lost.
Da? Echipamentul de inginerie care recuperează blindatele mai mult sau mai puțin prăjite. Eu nu știu cum pun stop, că mereu îl prind pe Brian cu ochii închiși.
They're just sending more rather than addressing why they're losing huge numbers of all of this equipment. Now, one last point I want to talk about is these Azov battalion or Azov regiment.
Da, hai să discutăm despre Azovi.
Calling it the Azov regiment now. These commanders of the Azov regiment that surrendered to the Russians in Mariupol and then were sent to
La Mariupol s-au predat rușilor, ok.
Turkey, and they were supposed to stay there for the rest of the conflict.
De ce au fost trimiși în Turcia, nu înțeleg. Ok, hai că sunt foarte interesat. Hai să ascultăm.
Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky went to Turkey. He was handed over these Azov commanders. He brought them back with him to Ukraine. They were in Lvov, and he was giving them a hero's welcome. They were elevating these Azov commanders to hero status. And President Zelensky was shaking hands with each and every one of them. And we have a CNN article.
Deci, demilitarizarea, da, înțeleg că și denazificarea trebuie să continue în ritm susținut, da? Că priviți.
About this right here. Azovstal leaders freed in prison swap promised to return to the battlefield in Ukraine. And the prison swap was actually part of the deal that left them in Turkey. And then Turkey made the unilateral decision, it seems, to send them back to Ukraine, breaking the deal that they had made with Russia. And the article says Ukrainian commanders who were captured by Russia after leading the defense of Mariupol, I would say who lost Mariupol, from the Azovstal steel plant have vowed to return to the battlefield following a prisoner swap. The commanders announced their intentions at a press conference held shortly after arriving in Lviv, Ukraine, with President Vladimir Zelensky on Saturday. They had previously been in Turkey as part of the prisoner swap. So it was Turkey who released them, not Russia. And it isn't until very deep in the CNN article that they admit that these fighters are actually from the Azov regiment. And as I've pointed out, and as I've cited the Western media itself, admitting Azov is a military unit in Ukraine's armed forces, officially incorporated into Ukraine's armed forces, that operates under a Nazi banner. It is a Nazi military unit in Ukraine. And the article says, Denis Prokopenko, a commander of Azov regiment, said,
Deci Denis Procopane ăla, sau cum îl cheamă, ce a spus ea?
The most important thing for today is that Ukraine's army has seized the strategic initiative on the front line and is moving forward every day. Prokopenko said returning to the front line was the reason he and others had returned to Ukraine. Video footage showed large crowds had gathered in Lviv to greet the leaders. I often hear people say, Brian, how could there be Nazis in Ukraine? How could Ukraine have...
Reau eu aici că subtitrarea a sucombat puțin. Brian primește adesea întrebări de la urmăritorii lui. Bă, cum ar putea totuși naziștii ăștia să fie atât de răspândiți în Ucraina? Totuși, care e faza cu ei? Ok, și ați reținut. Au venit mulțimi în Liov să... Da? Pe Azov.
A Nazi military unit officially incorporated into its armed forces. After all, President Vladimir Zelensky is Jewish. How is that possible? Well, this is how it's possible, right here. There he is, shaking hands with literal Nazis, the commander of a Nazi military unit officially incorporated in Ukraine's armed forces. It's that easy. President Vladimir Zelensky being Jewish means absolutely nothing. It doesn't make sense ideologically. It doesn't have to. It's the same as the U.S. using Israel and ISIS as part of its proxy war against Syria. It doesn't make any sense ideologically, but then you have to remember, at the end of the day, ideology is used to radicalize people at the lowest levels of society to go and fight to the death for some supposed cause, when in reality the US is using all of them, including groups that are ideologically diametrically opposed to one another. And that's what you have in Ukraine. The United States rounded up anyone willing to work with them. Doesn't matter if it's a comedian who happens to be Jewish, Nazis infesting the country's western regions. It
Cât de tare e, Brian, bravo!
doesn't matter. They're going to work with all of them, anyone who is willing, and they're going to put them all together and push them forward, whether it makes sense ideologically or not. It's up to the Western media to spin it, defend it, cover it up, or just not talk about it at all, like CNN in a more recent article did. But in a older article, CNN did admit everything about Azov's background. This is an article from March 2022. A far-right battalion has a key role in Ukraine's resistance. Its neo-Nazi history has been exploited by Putin.
Da? Deci a citit titlul. Ok.
And it says, President Vladimir Putin framed the Russian invasion of Ukraine as a special mission to protect Russian speakers from genocide at the hands of neo-Nazis. In a speech broadcast minutes before the invasion began on February 24th, Putin said, we will seek to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine, ignoring the fact that the country's president, Vladimir Zelensky, is Jewish. So this is CNN retroactively debunking their own rhetoric. They are claiming that President Zelensky is Jewish, so how could they possibly have Nazis?
Uite așa. Cum l-ați văzut? Dădea noroc cu băiatul ăla, da? Care avea niște însemne naziste, da? Pe uniformă. Simplu.
In the military, and then the more recent article from this week.
Uite, da? Ăsta și cu ăsta, da? Domnul evreu și domnul nazist. Dau noroc. Da? E vreun pixel albastru pe acolo, ceva? Nu se vede?
Week shows President Zelensky shaking hands with Azov Nazis. The article continues, this older article continues. CNN says the Azov battalion was associated with white supremacists and neo-Nazi ideology and insignia, and to this day their flag is still a Nazi wolf's angle. It was especially active in and around Mariupol in 2014 and 2015. CNN teams in the area at the time reported Azov's embrace of neo-Nazi emblems and paraphernalia. So this is CNN admitting.
Da, deci în 2014, 15 și tot așa, presa occidentală nu se ferea să le spună naziștilor cum sunt, naziști. Au pus Batista pe țambal din februarie 2022. Ok? Și acum cumva se contrazic tot pe ei din trecut. Dar nu din trecutul din Evul Mediu, din trecutul recent.
That Azov are Nazis. In the not-too-distant past, Azov's leadership openly espoused white supremacist views and cultivated links with similarly minded groups and individuals in the West. In 2010, Andrei Beletsky, now leader of the National Corps, the Azov movement's political wing, reportedly said his goal was to lead the white races of the world in a final crusade. And yet, this organization, that this overt racist...
Lasă că au început rușii cruciada.
An anti-Semite created...
I-au dat ăstuia cruciada de nu mai poate duce.
Is in Lvov shaking hands with President Zelensky, who's supposedly Jewish. It continues. It quotes Azov itself. It says, in a statement to CNN,
Supposedly? Adică nu e sigur că Zelensky ar fi evreu?
Azov regiment said it appreciates and respects Andrei Beletsky as the regiment's founder and first commander, but we have nothing to do with his political activities and the National Corps Party, if you believe that, adding the former commander never made such comments. And yet CNN already reported that he did make such comments. So this is Azov lying about its association with its founder and the very nature of who their founder was. And what this article, this older CNN article is doing is admitting it, without saying it, that all Azov is doing is trying to cover up its Nazism. It's not reforming it. It's not expunging it from the organization. It's just covering it up.
Ce covering up, băi, că l-au pe emblemă, da?
Because they know how bad it looks to certain segments of the Western public, and they know how
Să facă rebranding și cu simbolurile alea de pe uniforme.
how politically complicated it makes things for their Western sponsors. One of the Nazis that President Zelensky just this week was shaking hands with in Lvov is mentioned in this older CNN article.
Yeah.
His name is Denis Prokopenko. And then,
Deci l-a căutat Brian pe Prokopenko ăsta. Ia, îl căută Prokopenko 2015 CNN. Enter. Și l-a găsit, ce surpriză!
it says the current leader of Azov Regiment, Denis Prokopenko, is part of the core of the Azov movement since 2014, when they were openly Nazis, by the way. When even CNN admitted they were openly Nazis and openly embraced Nazism. And served under commanders who went on to lead the Azov movement's political and street wings. Kuzmenko told CNN, and Kuzmenko is a Ukrainian-American investigative journalist focusing on the Ukrainian far right. Prokopenko's deputy has explicitly praised the movement's founder, Belinsky, as a leader who finds sponsors that really invest money into the regiment. Kuzmenko also says in this CNN article, while it's correct to point out that Ukraine's far right has minimal electoral support, Azov has enjoyed near impunity for violence aimed at minorities, were unchecked in their efforts to build influence in military and security forces, and have been normalized by Ukraine's senior leaders, he said. And then we go back to just this week. Here is the president of Ukraine, Vladimir Zelensky, shaking hands with these Nazis, reported as Nazis by CNN last year. I thought it was very important to point this out. Every time Azov comes up, it's an opportunity to look at just how systematically dishonest the Western media is, but also how you don't need to read Russian state media to understand what Azov is. CNN has already admitted it, and then more recently, when it's inconvenient to talk about these facts, they omit it. And they depend on audiences out there, the general public, not to remember what CNN itself was reporting just last year about Azov, so that they can spin them off as heroes returning home and going back into battle. That is the narrative today, when last year it was maybe they're Nazis, maybe they're not, it's a little complicated. And then back in 2014, and CNN admitted this in their older article, that their reporters were there and they saw them and they were Nazis and they were covered in Nazi insignia and paraphernalia. The effect
Și tatuaje.
is going to continue grinding on. There's an upcoming NATO summit. We'll have to wait and see what comes out of that. There's a lot of speculation. A lot of it sounds like they're just going to repackage the assistance they're already giving to Ukraine as some sort of substitute for even talking about Ukraine entering into NATO. But we'll have to wait and see. Until that, if you thought this video was useful, please like and share. Think about subscribing to...
Mulțumim, Brian, și eu vă mulțumesc vouă pentru că ați ajuns până în acest punct al videoclipului. Nu uitați de like, dați și un share dacă se poate și multe mulțumiri celor care mă susțin ca membri ai canalului Noaptea Minții și pe Patreon. Link-urile le aveți în descrierea videoclipului. Haide, papa, și vă aștept la